Welcome back, everyone, to the Property Journey Podcast, episode 23. Roy, here we are. Property investment FAQs.
Yes, we're getting a lot of inquiries in after the last podcast about it, so we'll run through
some of the frequently asked questions. They're going to be a bit generalised. Some of them might overlap with some of the previous episodes, but obviously that is going to be the case. And for anyone listening, apologies for the voice. If the voice goes or it breaks, I do apologise. Right, first question, Roy, is what are the first steps to getting into property investment?
Well, not to give investment advice, but just as a general comment, you should always make sure that if you're going to invest, is that money, is there any risk of losing that money? And if you lose that money, will that make a big difference to your life? And you might think that's a bit of a silly question, but you hear all these stories where people think, oh, I've got a wee bit of money, but they heavily rely on that money. It could be, money they've kept aside for like a bill that's coming, or, anything like that. And then they put it into an investment, whatever that investment is, doesn't go to plan, and then they lose that money, and then they lose more than that. They maybe lose their house, they lose their car, they lose whatever else, their credit score. So you only ever invest when you've got money sitting there that you're not afraid of losing.
Essentially, it's kind of like don't raid your savings account, because if you do that and then a bill comes up that you can't afford to pay,
yes,
you're sitting there kind of starting to worry and maybe put yourself into debt, essentially.
Exactly. The way most people invest is, I'm thinking more so like from a business point of view. A lot of business owners, they work all year, they run their business, they've got, they've made a profit. They basically take a bit maybe as a salary for themselves, they reinvest money back into their own business to improve it, working capital, and then they always keep aside a little bit more. That's a very safe way of running a business. So it's that little bit aside that they then put into an investment, whatever that is. So in that example, well, if the investment goes wrong, well, they still have their business, it's still running, and it's not impacting the business.
So that kind of then leads on to the next question. Do I need a large amount of capital or money to begin investing in property?
It all depends on what your view on it is and how heavily involved you want to get into it. So the very basic format is you would need money if you're looking to buy the house yourself. So you have two options. You can either buy it completely outright, which then means you would need a large sum of money, or you can put down a deposit, which is normally 25% of the value of the house. Another way could be you maybe team up with another person. So therefore then the two of you buy the house. So that means, again, you need less money to put into it. Or there are other options as well where you can maybe take your money and lend it out to somebody who then uses it for investment. So there's loads of different options which are completely personal or unique to that person as to what their view and their circumstances are.
And probably to even touch on that then it would be speaking to the likes of a mentor or someone that's obviously experienced within property investment that would be able to guide you kind of what suits maybe your action plan or what you want to do then in the future.
Always best. There's a lot of people out there that promise you, or they say, oh, this is easy. Like I come across that so many times. People want to buy a house because they think it's easy. They know a friend, they have a cousin who buys one and it's simple. And I'm just looking at them thinking, now you be very careful, and you advise them, be very, very careful here. Do you know what you're doing? Have you done your research? Who have you guiding you? Have you got experience, or is the person guiding you got experience as well? Not just simply somebody who's maybe done a wee course or read a book or watched a 20-minute YouTube video on it.
Or listen to me maybe talking, for 20 minutes on a podcast. So it's all right for you, Roy, because you've got the experience and whatnot. I'm just the one that asks the questions. What kind of then would be the different types of property investment for, say, for example, beginners? So probably from that then, are you looking at what sort of type of housing, or if you're, obviously with property, what would you be looking to start with if you were a beginner?
Not getting too technical. about it, and I can easily sit down with somebody and go through it in more detail, because you could be here for hours. The most common way is you buy a residential house, and then you buy the house that is suitable to your investment amount. Now, what a lot of people do, which is the worst thing you can do, is to simply say or think to themselves, right, I want to buy a house. They go onto a search engine, they search what's for sale, and they pick the cheapest house that's there. And then really what they're doing is they're learning the process themselves, and more than likely going to learn the hard way. So it's all about how much money have you got, and then what is the end goal? You know, what sort of a return are you hoping to get from it? How much effort are you looking to put into it? And what's your view on risk?
Because it's always the saying, isn't it, that, you know, if you were looking at a house and it's 20 grand cheaper than one in a similar street, why is it 20 grand cheaper?
Yeah.
You know, what's the problems? What are you going to run into further down the line? You know, it's not always about the cheapest side of things.
Absolutely.
At the same time, then, I suppose it's probably very similar. Like, if you're only getting into property investment, you're not going to go out and buy HMO, for example, you know, because you're probably sitting thinking to yourself, how am I going to cope with understanding and learning while you've just went out and bought this probably behemoth, you know, at least one property.
Yeah,
get used to it, get to know this sort of what you're dealing with, and then
extend after that. You know, the likes of HMOs, you know, there's fewer people at it. You know, even the legal industry, you know, not every single solicitor knows the full ins and outs of it as well. Not every estate agent will deal with it as well. So it is a niche market.
I think we had talked as well in the previous podcast, it's a different type of mortgage as well.
Different type of everything's completely different about it. So again, that suits particular investors, but it's a matter of, you know, what's your desires, and then pick the strategy and the type of property from that.
So leading on from that then, how do you find the best locations? Do you invest in property? Is it something along the lines of you became speaking to a mentor or someone that knows the local area that would be able to guide you, look, here's the best location to buy in this local area that's local to you? You know, probably the second part of the question is, if you're living in the south of the country, are you realistically going to buy a property in the north of the country that you're going to be renting out, or, you know, trying to that's your investment property? Again, does that align to what your goals are?
It's all about knowledge and experience, you know, and you can't put a value on it. So yes, having the knowledge, there's different areas, different streets. You know, I could tell you 3 different developments that, you know, are doing really well, as in, you know, they'll rent within days. They're growing in price easily every day as well. I could tell you other areas, you know, that there's automatically going to be damp issues in particular rooms. I'm going to know exactly they're maybe in a higher crime area, you know. So all those sorts of things that if you don't know that knowledge and you go in and buy it, you're learning it the hard way.
And that's what I'm saying then as well. If you're potentially even going to manage a property yourself, you know, rather than looking at property management company, you're sitting thinking, oh well, I'll tell you what, I'll be looking after this myself, I'll be getting the rent, I'll be sorting out any of the issues and all the rest of it. For location wise, if you live in Uri and you buy a property in Maherfield, the logistical side of being able to deal with that's going to be completely different as well then.
Absolutely. Another example as well is, you know, knowledge and working out the figures. I had somebody approach me the other day. They were looking at tenant for their property. I did a valuation on it and basically told them how much it could rent for, and their response to me was, oh, I need more money than that. I said, well, what do you mean? Oh, because my mortgage and my rates and my insurance is costing this amount of money, so it needs to rent for more than this. And my response was, well, you don't set the rent, the market sets the rent. So unfortunately, you've got into property without getting the guidance. You've made a big mistake here. This isn't going to stack up for you. Whereas had they spoken beforehand, done their due diligence, got the right house for the mortgage payments and the rates, the insurance, how much it's going to rent for, and then they can work out what's their profit.
And just to follow up on that, like, you know, is that something essentially then, if you're in that situation and you're trying to charge a rent that no one's realistically going to pay,
Yeah.
do you just end up having to take that on the chin?
Yes.
Or try and get out?
Well, some experience from it would be you're limiting your market. So it means, yes, the house will sit on the market and it's going to take longer to get a tenant into it. It doesn't necessarily mean you won't get a tenant. And at the minute, there's a high demand for properties. So it could be the case whereby there's maybe 3 or 4 houses in a particular area that's going to be all cheaper than yours. So that means they're going to be rented out first. Mm-hmm. So if there's nothing else in that area and it's a good area, well, then at that point, you may be fortunate and achieve that higher rent. What I also find from experience as well is sometimes if you charge too much, then it can attract the wrong type of tenant, oddly enough, because a rogue tenant is aware of that. They know if a property's been sitting, and then they'll come in, promise everything, and say yes, they can afford it, yes, they want the house, they'll get moved in, and then after a few months, then they stop paying the rent, and you're immediately in big trouble. It means you've got a property, you have somebody in it, they're not paying the rent, you've got all these bills, and it just snowballs into a very big headache.
And that's what I was going to touch on as well, was the fact that not only have you got a rogue tenant maybe moved in and they're not paying the rent, but you've also been sitting for 3 or 4 months vacant.
Yeah.
Which you've been taking that payment, you know, you've no rent coming in, you're having to pay it yourself, you know, and then the next minute then you have a tenant and pays 3 months and then they just decide they're not paying it anymore.
And it's the mental drain as well. You know, people don't realise owning property is like being a business owner as well. Being a business owner, you know, you have to put on your armour every day because there's always going to be some battle that you're going into, whether it's an employee issue, whether it's a customer issue, whether something's not happening. You need to be able to deal with it, handle it, and move on. Whereas what I find, a lot of people who don't know much about property, who heavily need that investment, as soon as that money doesn't come in or there's an issue, they're lying in bed awake at night, they can't sleep, it's having an impact on their relationships, everything. So that's why it's all about the right qualities coming into investment and just not thinking it's easy and thinking of the money side of things.
And that's what I was about to say then. It sort of relates back to what we talked about there at the very start, where it's kind of the first steps and, you know, your capital side of things. If you clear yourself out and you don't have any money sitting basically as a backup, then, you know, you're then sitting with maybe a mortgage payment and you maybe have a mortgage in your own house and 2 of these are coming out every month and you don't have a rental, you know, income coming in.
Exactly.
The stress levels go up and as you say, you're lying in bed at night thinking about it.
Yeah.
So we've kind of touched then on as well then, what are the common ways to finance then obviously a property investment? So you have the person that's got maybe the money sitting, the cash is sitting there, they can go in, cash buyer buys the house, doesn't have to worry about a mortgage, and they are just collecting essentially the rental income coming in.
Yeah.
Obviously then, is there a difference then with your mortgage then, if someone's going in, putting a deposit down, taking the rest out in a mortgage? Is that kind of the main 2 finances?
That would be a very common way of doing it. And that would mean then, on average, every lender has their own criteria, but very general, you put down 25% of a deposit. So the 25% of the value of the house that you've agreed it for. And then you borrow the rest of it. And then so the first option is you have the money completely to buy the house outright. Second option is you take a mortgage out with a high street bank, and the third option is there can be private companies out there or private people who have money sitting and they simply will lend the money out, so they'll effectively act as a bank and like a bank, and it's the exact same concept. The only difference with them is it's completely unique to them. You know, there could be scenarios where they'll lend you 10%, they could lend you 100%. It's completely unique on the circumstances.
If they are lending, essentially, are they just charging an interest rate? So, for example, the bank might charge 6% or 8% interest. Someone private might turn around and say, I'm happy enough to take 4.
With the private side, it opens up a lot more doors. Normally and very simply, they will just charge an interest like a bank. But there are scenarios whereby maybe you have a strategy for the property and it might be to buy the property, maybe do a bit of development work to it, and then sell it within a time frame. And it could be the case whereby the private lender lends you the money and then maybe has a percentage of the deal. So it means then if you sell the property and make a profit, then they'll take a bit of it
percentage of the profit then. And then obviously, whenever we're talking about mortgages here, are we talking then, because we're not talking about your bog standard residential, we're talking as a buy-to-let?
So it's a buy-to-let, different criteria in that the banks always ask for that higher deposit, whereas if you were buying your own house to live in, you maybe only need as little as 10% of a deposit, whereas when it's a buy-to-let, an investment property, you have to put more of a deposit down. And the main reason for that is it's risk, because the bank needs to know that there's somebody going to be living in that property, and then they're taking on the risk that if that tenant stops paying, they need to make sure that they're completely covered, that if they need to repossess the property after so many months, that they'll, that they're safeguarded and hopefully get back all of their money.
And obviously then, one of the big questions around it as well is tax. Mm-hmm. I know we're not accountants here, so we'll not get, into the different tax codes and all this jazz whenever you start looking at all that. But obviously when you're a landlord and you're renting property, you're going to be paying tax on the money that's coming in.
Yes, I've come across that as before, where a lot of people think, oh, this is simple, this is easy, and they go and rent the house out, and then they maybe collect the rent themselves, and it gets very tempting whereby, they may be paying out the bills or what have you, and it's very tempted where they think to themselves, oh sure, it's only a few quid I'm making every month. Doesn't matter. If you make money, everything has to be declared to HMRC. Even there's times where you're making a loss, it's always advisable to declare everything to HMRC, and there has to be tax to be paid on that. So a lot of people, I've been to a lot of seminars about property, about investment, and they talk through all these live examples of how much they're borrowing, how much they're making, but they're not factoring in tax. And sometimes looking at those examples that they're putting up, as soon as you put tax in, it's actually wiping out the whole point of the whole process. And I'm thinking to myself, seriously, and you're giving out this advice, are you really just selling a course here just to to get people roped in? So you have to go through from start to finish every single figure and make sure it is suitable to your needs.
Probably then the next thing is how do you analyze, say, the property market to identify like good investment opportunities? Is that, I know that's something that you've talked about recently with like the property sourcing. Like you go onto some of the online websites there, and you're searching through different properties. Is there certain kind of criteria that you're looking at that you be kind of saying then this is what we should be going for, or does it nearly just come with the experience of knowing the areas and knowing the housing and knowing the demand and knowing kind of what you're getting in that house and what you're going to charge, and is it just essentially that experience?
It's experience and data. I think I've talked before about data. I'm obsessed with it and tracking everything. In the areas that I focus on, I know, and I've records of everything as to how much the houses are selling for, how much they're renting for. So from that, I can immediately see in a particular development or a particular street and know, right, well, there was a house sold for X amount there 2 months ago, 6 months ago, this is how much it was worth. So this house here, well, if you're charging less or charging more, you can figure out, is it a good deal, is it not a good deal? And then you immediately know as well in the rental game, how much rent are you going to get for it? What type of tenant are you going to get? And how quickly is it going to rent for? So you need to put all those markers together, and that's what gives you your right property.
Because this is probably one of the sort of frequently asked questions. Essentially, what you're looking at is your monthly kind of income. So that's your rental payment that you're getting off the tenant that's living there. Is the other factor then also what you're looking at is the price increase in the property? So if you buy it for, say, £100,000, are you looking then at the potential for it to maybe move to 110 or 115 if you decided to sell it as well?
Generally, for most investments, you're looking, particularly in this, you're looking maybe at as an income. and then you're also looking at a capital growth. So yes, you could get your rental profit every month from it, and then you can, if you want, rely on property growth, so as in the value of the house increasing. But again, just to be very general about it, there's no guarantee that there is going to be capital growth. So you don't always just hang your hat on it. So again, when you're working out your strategy and your investment, you're factoring in, well, what if this price drops a wee bit? Or, what if it, drops 5%, 10%, 20%? How much is that going to impact you? And can you still afford it? And can you still make use? It's like getting into the stock market. It's very volatile. It goes up and down every single day. You have to be prepared. Well, if your stocks drop 30%, does that wipe you out or does it not? So it's the same sort of thing. And then to come back to your question, it comes down, and I sound as if I'm repeating myself, it depends on the person. Yeah. I come across investors who will buy a property, they're not really worried about, are they making any profit every month, because they are hinging on the fact that it's a good area, it's going to rise massively in a particular time frame, and that's where they're going to cash in. And you have other people who completely don't really care about whether there's going to be big capital growth or not, but they're looking on how much money are they making on a monthly basis.
And that's why I asked the question, because that's where, as you say, for some properties, you could be buying in an area that there's maybe going to be, say, new build developments popping up around it, which means the prices of the houses in that area might become more affluent.
Yeah.
The price of the house actually goes up then. They're not worried about kind of what they're getting per month. They're worried about how much, they might have bought 3 houses in that area, and they're thinking, right, well, in the next 10, 15 years, these houses could be up 40 or 50 grand each, or is it a case of then you're focused kind of on what I'm getting every month and making sure that the money that's coming in is a good deal for me?
Yeah.
Probably another big question then is residential or commercial? Which one do you get into? Is it back to who you are as a person and what you're willing to get in? Because they're two completely different areas.
Completely different. If it is something where you want to test the market, you're probably safer going into the residential side of things. And the reason for that is the finances is more readily available. Tenants are generally far faster to get. And up until fairly recently, landlords have more rights. Whereas from a commercial point of view, generally it's maybe more expensive. It's harder to get the finance. They're more highly likely harder to rent, which then means if it does go vacant, you're sitting with no rent for a very, very long time. So they're two different ball games, and it's down to your risk. And it's always, if you want to play it safe, go into the residential side of things. You can learn the knowledge, learn the skills, and then at least that is transferable over to commercial.
Because again, for some people, they maybe don't even think about the residential side. They're maybe thinking about, when you're property investing, you're buying units or warehouses, or you know what I mean. There's probably so many different avenues that even we haven't talked about that we could do in future episodes. This one's a good one. How can I predict future growth areas for property investment? You can't.
Simply, you can't guarantee it. Yes, you can follow trends. Yes, you can make predictions. Yes, you can do your research into maybe particular areas. If there's a new school going to be built, maybe a new road going to be put in, maybe investment by the local council or government. Those are all factors that you can think about, but you're still making a prediction. There is never a guarantee.
It's like, again, because you're talking about a market. It's a market that's going to fluctuate up and down.
Yeah.
Can you predict it? Well, as you say, if you go back, probably looking at the 100 years and you follow the graphs, it does continuously go up.
Yeah.
But there's a few dips along the way, and if you're on the wrong side of it, it's not good news for you.
Yeah.
Right. Should I manage my investment properties myself or hire a property manager?
Well, if I was to say to you, Chris, here's £100,000, I want you to put that into the stock market, would you feel confident?
I'd give it a go, but you know, I don't think you'd maybe be particularly happy with the results.
No. You know, at the end of the day, you're borrowing. Most times, you're borrowing a lot of money, and this is where it surprises me, where people are very flippant about it. You know, they're putting in a very small amount, and they're borrowing a lot, so it's not their money, and they're getting into something that they know absolutely nothing about, and they go in, dare I say, arrogant, as if to say, "Oh, this is easy. Jimmy down the road there, he's two houses. You know, it's simple for him." And then I advise so many people all the time: get an agent, do your homework. Oh no, it's simple, it's easy. And I feel so bad whenever you get a phone call 6 months later. It might be 12 months later, it might be 3 years later. It doesn't matter. You will always get that phone call when something goes wrong. They're in a drama, they're in a panic, and it's just a complete state. And in those circumstances, you would love to say to them, "I told you so."
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yes, if I wanted to build a wall or build a house, you know, I could do that, but is it going to be very good? No. And yes, I could build this wall here now, and looking at it, it'd actually be all right.
Yeah.
But then you go on, 6 months later, it could fall down, it could crack or whatever, because I haven't done my homework right, haven't done the foundations, whatever. I'm just trying to make an example. It's not as easy as people think.
Because it's back to that as well, you know, as you're saying there, if you don't have the experience in it, it could all go well for the first 6 months or 12 months, but it's when you yourself are having to then deal with, for example, a tenant hasn't paid, or the Saturday night phone calls that the washing machine's broke or something, or you know, the lights aren't working, or the fuses have blown, or the heating's not working. You know, the list goes on and on and on of the different problems that you yourself then are going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And that is your essentially your job to go and deal with that.
Yeah.
You know, you can't leave someone in a house that has no heating. It's up to you to be able to deal with that. So is it up to you, or is that something that you'd be willing to take on? Factor that in, and then as well as what you're saying, you know, a property manager's there to be able to help guide you and sort it all out for you, and be able to hand you your check then at the end every month.
It's like anything, you know, if you're, you know, a top football player, you know, you have your manager. Yes, you know how to play football, but it's the manager who has all those years of experience, the wealth of knowledge, the different circumstances, what have you, that's telling you how to play.
Yeah.
And it's the exact same in all aspects of life. People think, you know, any true business person has a mentor. Even whether you're a business owner, even if you are an employee who wants to perform well and climb up the ladder, you should always get a mentor. So a mentor or an expert in every single thing that you do. Because
it's even the same as anything. If you look at a situation, your view on a situation, and you bring a fresh set of eyes in, it's going to maybe spark something where you're going, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't consider that. Actually, you know what, maybe there is a different way that we could be doing these. You know, that's going to be a betterment for what your situation is. What are the biggest challenges of a landlord or being a landlord?
Ooh, that's a good question. Challenges. Probably tax at the minute. So you have to be very creative and look at your options and get the right advice to make sure you're maximizing it. And also maximizing your rent, but being realistic. I think that's, when I'm talking, that's the key one. I would have clients that saying to me, "Oh, I'm getting this rent, but you know, there's a house down the road. It's getting more." Yes, you can charge a house or charge rent at the market value, but knowing the market as well, you need to know as well there's a possibility that, you know, you're just maximizing it too much. You're squeezing it too much. You're maybe putting a tenant under pressure, and you could get high rent for the first 3, 4, 5 months, and then after that the tenant, you know, gets it tight and buckles, and then you're back to square one. Whereas opposed to maybe having your rent maybe £20, you know, in the rental game, the rent is very sensitive. Even £20 less, £30 less a month will make a big difference in the type of tenant that you attract and the affordability of somebody. You know, a lot of people are living on a month-to-month basis, and a change in their circumstances by that amount can make all the difference.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I suppose then probably this actually flows into this question about how can I ensure a steady rental income for my properties? Is it just be realistic about
being realistic of the rent that you're charging, regularly checking on the property? So at least every 6 months, checking in to make sure is the property being maintained by the tenant. And then also there are parts of the property that the landlord is responsible for. So sometimes the likes of, is the boiler running efficiently? Is there a broken roof tile? All those sorts of things where you're constantly keeping and maintaining your asset to keep it well looked after. So it's not going to lead on to a bigger problem down the line. And then also being tight on the rents. So what that means is making sure you have an exact date every single month that the tenant pays. And if the rent isn't paid, you're on it straight away to see what is the issue. Is it a simple error? Is it a mistake? Is it a banking issue? Or is it the fact that the tenant has maybe lost their job, doesn't have the payment, and you're immediately acting on it?
Yeah. And putting, I think we had talked about this before, putting a contingency sort of plan in place that, at least if we can work this out, then, the tenant doesn't feel like they're completely under pressure to get it.
Exactly.
We're happy enough to take a bit of a dip in the rent here, but then you'll be owing extra in 6 months' times or whatever, and working it out. Probably one of the big ones then is kind of what's the difference then between, and I suppose it's the more prominent of what you see in social media and online nowadays is flipping properties. So the difference between sort of flipping properties and buy to let,
So a flip is basically you're passing it on. More than likely, either you're not going to be owning it at all, or you're owning it for a very short time. So an example of that would be you are going to buy a house, but before you actually commit to it and complete on it, you have somebody else lined up, and then you immediately flip it to them, maybe on the same day for a profit, or you have a house lined up and you're maybe going to flip it in a couple of months or a couple of weeks after you've bought the house. Now, there's a lot of courses out there and a lot of social media about getting into flipping, and there's loads of money and things like that. Again, social media, treat it cautiously. Yes, there are those opportunities out there, and there's people that say, this is how much money I'm making. But anybody who's making a lot of money is because they've got the experience, the skill set, and the knowledge of it. So to get into that, you need to be spending a lot of time.
Similar, I suppose, you see here's what I bought it for and here's what I sold it for, but there's things like legal fees, potential tax issues,
estate agent fees, what money did they spend on it, and also ultimately their time on it as well. A lot of people buy a house and they do it up, like refurb it and sell it, and they think they've made a profit, but their profit is effectively their labour. And that's not profit, that's just another job.
Because if you made 3 or 4 grand, but it took you 2 months and you were spending every day or every hour under the sun in it,
that's labour, that's not profit.
And I suppose then that's where kind of then if you're flipping, that's kind of you're either in refurbing, or as you say, you have someone lined up that the minute you buy it, you're essentially selling it on to someone that's willing to take it off your hands. Buy to let is you're buying the property, you're getting the tenant sorted, or
you're renting it out, and it's normally a wee bit more of a longer term.
On the last couple of ones, how do I create a diversified property portfolio? So probably wouldn't be thinking at this of having residential and commercial, but probably a more diversified residential.
Again, it's down to the person. Some examples could be you buy lower end properties, which means they rent very well, they've good rents, but they're not increasing in value. You normally find maybe that's a bit of an older property as well, so it's going to be, you have to factor in repairs and maintenance and upgrading. Compare that to a fresher house in a nice development. Your costs are going to be higher. Yes, you might get more rent, but you'll have less profit effectively every month. but in theory, you're going to have lower tenant turnover, you're going to have less repairs, it's going to rent very quickly, and generally that end of the market will rise a wee bit more in capital value. So I suppose that's the best way of diversifying it, because you're covering all aspects of it.
Essentially, new build and old build, kind of bring both
in between, yes.
Yeah. Right then, probably then one, maybe some of your clients will have experience in this as well. Then is scaling. You know, how do you scale your portfolio over time? Is it again back to kind of what people's personal preferences or their personal situation?
Personal circumstances, view the risk on how driven that they are. You can scale it up by just simply borrowing more and more and leveraging what you have, or another way is you have an income maybe from a business or profit or whatever that you're continually pouring into it. So effectively you need either more opportunities or more money to help scale that up. And to do that, you either need a lot of time yourself to do it, to be getting the right sort of properties, or have the right sort of team on board who's getting you those properties within that time frame as well.
Having a strategy in place, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
And then, and I think you might have touched on it as well. That's something you sit down with your clients with and go through a strategy.
Yeah. And
sort of bullet point out aims and objectives and what you want. You know, what kind of your plan is, and where do you see it in 5 years or 10 years, or exactly. How long term is it that you're going with them?
Yeah, and you just work that all out. It's like if I was going to travel, you know, from here to the south of England. You know, you work out, well, when do you want to be there by? How are you going to get there? What's your travel methods? What's your cost methods? And you're going to work that all out. And what difficulties are you going to come up against? It's the exact same in property as well. You know, you just don't buy one and hope that it all works out. You know, it's like a journey. You know, you don't just get a bus here. What's the closest bus that comes to me? That's going to get me to the south of England. No, it's not. You have to figure it all out. And if you keep focused on it, you know, it'll work well for you.
Right, final two. What are the biggest sort of investment trends that maybe you're seeing in the market at the moment? Like trends wise, I know it's difficult to maybe see it, but
trends, probably just your typical buy-to-lets. We are seeing a bit more of, I'll use the phrase collaboration, whereby buyers are trying to find out private investors and work with them a wee bit more, and there are more and more private investors available. So for instance, the reason for that is, you know, you generally find that they have money, you know, maybe a big business, they have property themselves, but at the same time, you know, it's a diversified portfolio for them. So they're still investing as such in property, but yet they're maybe getting a better return. Their money's not locked away for such a long time, and basically they're in a wee bit more of a control of it.
And the final thing then is what would your piece of advice be then for people with, say, property investment questions or looking answers to kind of property investment? What would your piece of advice be then?
Advice would be pick what area, as in location, that you want to get involved in. You know, like for instance, if you're looking to invest in Northern Ireland, well, I know it's a small country, but whereabouts in Northern Ireland do you want to invest in? Because there's big differences in it. And again, maybe get somebody with expertise in that area. You know, like for instance, if somebody was to come to me and, you know, say they want to invest in a Skilling, well, yes, I could sit down, I could help them, but I don't know the full knowledge of that area. I don't, you know, so I wouldn't be the best person for it. Likewise, if you're from Northern Ireland and you want to invest in the south, in the likes of Dublin, you know, again, you don't get a mentor or get experience from somebody here. There's always somebody in that local area. So basically,
get a mentor in
the area. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's it, Roy. That's episode 23. Quite a few good questions in there. Some of those actually come in from some of our listeners, and some of them I've kind of just pulled because I knew they would be good topics to be able to obviously discuss. So thank you very much. Episode 23.
Thank you, Chris.
FAQs for property investment, and we stayed on schedule this week, so this is two weeks exactly after our last one, so we're going to keep at it. So thank you very much everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.